Buzz about an American recession, though, is growing louder recently after Wall Street suffered its biggest day drop last week. Economists warned the slowing economy could dip into a recession by the end of 2020 if trade tensions escalated in the coming months. Washington has been engaged in trade spats with China, with Europe, and its neighbors in the Americas. Data show from June shows actually America's trade gap with China remains largely unchanged, and its deficit with Mexico hit a record high. In other words, trade wars does not necessarily help with the dealing of trade deficit. Caught in the middle of turmoil are developing nations vulnerable to a global slowdown. With this in mind, I had an exclusive one with former Mexican president and also former Bolivian president. Here is what they had to say during our talk.
But I'm not talking about the arbitration of the... China and Mexico have in common that we are suffering from a terrible attack coming from the President of the United States. The main point is this trade war is going to have an impact in the global economy as a whole. So that is going to have a negative impact in the economic growth with a lot of jobs, maybe 1,000 or maybe million of jobs are going to be lost, either in Mexico, China, or the United States.
Obviously, global supply chain has been changing as a result of the current quote-unquote trade war. Even in the Asia-Pacific region, we have seen not only between China and the United States, but also Japan, South Korea. We're also likely to see other hotspots evolved into trade disputes. So what do you make of that?
Well, it's certainly the first time we have had a U.S. government that instead of leading the world towards open trade integration is the leader of protectionism, because not only have they modified the trade arrangements south with Mexico, which will cascade down to Central America, Colombia, Peru, Chile. We have all copy-pasted the Mexican agreement. So if the Mexican agreement changes or is wiped out, it will affect everybody down south. But as you know, the current U.S. government has annulled the Trans-Pacific arrangement, the transatlantic, and it puts tariffs on Canada as well. So our protection is all over, and protectionism is contagious and is bad. And I think it's sad that the U.S., instead of leading towards open integration, it is better known now for walls, imposing tariffs, and deporting people. And I think it's quite a contrast with China, that with the Belt and Road, which has to be made a belt and sea lane for Latin America across the Pacific, is showing a much better way of pushing forward in the 21st century towards integration. Because like you mentioned, when the giant of the world, the U.S., becomes protectionist, it's easy for South Korea to impose tariffs on Japan and vice versa, and Europe to the rest, and it's a bad example. And I think China has a unique opportunity to show the world that it can still lead on open integration as opposed to what the U.S. is doing.
But many are asking that question, exactly what you have just said. Are the rest of the world be able to hold to the bottom line that we used to have, and not to follow the example of one economy, which of course is still the largest economy in the world, the way of doing things?
In real terms, we are only destroying an incredible value everywhere, economic value. So what we are expecting, what I expect is, we need to obligate to the participants, in particular the government of the United States, to learn that nobody is able to win in a trade war. Sooner or later, we need to demonstrate that this is a zero-sum game. And the way to do that is, of course, preventing such kind of attitude and pressing in the political arena in the United States with the right instruments, acting together between China and other big players in the world. And the big player, the biggest in this moment despite China, is Mexico.
When the world's largest economies goes on trade wars, what can the rest do? The former president of Mexico doesn't hesitate to write his own prescription, namely looking at China and Mexico. What can they do together? Take a look. But you know what? It's the game by the current administration in Washington. Divide and conquer. As simple as that. Bilateral. Let's just do bilateral. That's what's suggested. And therefore, all divided and all conquered. That's what they're thinking.
I agree with you. But when China took the measures against the tariffs, American tariffs, for instance, China decided to block any purchase of soybean from America. That's a great measure. But as with just a small coordination with Mexico, Mexico could take exactly the same measure, and the measure itself could be much more powerful. So, but the American, as you were saying, are dividing, and Mexico became the main buyer of soybean that China was not buying anymore. So my point is, yes, Americans are trying to divide everyone else, but the people and countries suffering such kind of mistaken attitude could act in a more coordinated way, definitely.
But there's a difficulty to that, Mr. President. For example, there are mechanisms internationally and regionally in a way that for countries' economies to coordinate with one another, G20, APEC, and you name it. However, every of these organizations in the United States is a big participant at this moment. We've seen the U.S. trying to blockade some of the progress and consensus in these mechanisms. So if countries really want to consult with one another, bilateral is a very slow process. Arbitration power of the World Trade Organization will come to an end at the end of this year because all the judges will run out of their term.
Yes, the U.S. government, by definition, it is undermining all multilateral institutions. What President Calderon is suggesting is divide and conquer only works insofar as we are divided. What he's suggesting is that if Europe, China, Mexico, the rest of Latin America, at the same time, simultaneously, work in an integrated fashion against U.S. disintegration policies, then it would dramatically change that, because then they could not divide us. If everybody says, we are going to stop buying soybeans from the U.S. so long as they're protectionist, and China will buy more soybeans from Argentina and Brazil, and Mexico will buy from Brazil, then the U.S. would pay the price and the consequence. And I think this coordinated action needs to be taken in all fronts, because the way things are going, trade disputes are going to move on to exchange rate disputes, which are going to move on to monetary policy and interest rates.
And that is very
dangerous, and that requires the coordination that President Calderon is suggesting on the tariff retaliatory point aspects, on the exchange rate movements, and on interest rates, because the U.S. is large, but China, Mexico, Latin America, Brazil, Argentina, and Europe together are much larger than the U.S.
Some suggest Washington is betting on the mentality that we all have. They say it's a human nature, that nobody wants to step one step forward to the strong one, but rather want to hide behind others when dangers come. So that is the mentality some suggest that Washington is playing with right now.
It is a very important suggestion what President Calderon is saying. Imagine if at the next G20, he comes from a large country. He hosted the G20 in 2012. And that is before it was the G7. Europe, U.S., and Japan. Now with the G20, we have China, we have Mexico, we have Brazil, we have Argentina. Imagine if at the next G20, the G19 meet together the day before and decide to coordinate the defenses against tariff increases from the U.S. against, by the way, exchange rates. The U.S. complains about exchange rate movements, but at the heyday of the financial crisis, the U.S. was printing one Brazil GDP per year. That was massive amounts of printing. But since you cannot devalue the dollar against itself, nobody cared. But it was cheap dollars flowing around. So what President Calderon is suggesting is coordination on the trade tariff front, on exchange rates, on monetary policy and interest rates. If the G19, to say something, would take a common position vis-a-vis measures that can be given as a counterpart to the U.S., I assure you the reaction in the U.S. will be different as opposed to divide and conquer.
I'm talking about politics as well. Because who's going to stop Donald Trump? His own voters. We need to focus on those voters in all those states where the Republicans won. So coming back, Idaho, very Republican, redneck farmers. We need to push on them. We need to make them to pay the price because they are going to move all the way against Trump and say, hey, Mr. President, you're making a big mistake with us, trying to affect the Chinese and Mexican people. We are affecting us. That's politics, very pragmatical. It's the real field in which the decisions are taken.
Before we go, everyone, one sentence if you can, sir. What do you think is the ultimate solution to the deadlock of the trade situation worldwide?
The world's leaders in whatever fora they meet, including the G20, to regain the vital center and to have the large economies be the leaders in trade integration as opposed to the leaders of protectionism.
Mr. President.
Before, the trade war should be to be coordinated in order to prevent and block the American efforts to do it. Afterwards, we need to get the way in which the entire world understands that this is a zero-sum game, that nobody is going to win anything, and we all are going to lose a lot of economic growth and jobs everywhere. So we need to stop that, but saying to the people who are able to vote, and so that democracies, that nobody is winning in this strategy started by President Trump in the United States.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
both of you, Mr. President,
Thank you.
for helping us understand your perspectives.
Thank you.
Really appreciate
Thank
it.
you very much.
Thank you. That was former Mexican president and also former Bolivian president talking about their own proposals on how to deal with trade issues and trade protectionism. Of course, it's up to individual countries to calibrate their own trade policies. And that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Inside CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Inside team, thanks for watching. And tune in again next time for more insights across China and around the world.